2008 through 2009 Lexus GX470 alternator replacement. I'm Brian Esser from How To Automotive. I'm going to walk you step by step through the process of changing out the alternator. The very first thing we need to do is disconnect the negative battery cable, and then once you get it disconnected, you want to tuck it down on the side of the battery so it doesn't flip back up and make contact with the post. Now you're going to want to get the front of the vehicle up in the air. Use floor jacks and jack stands if you're doing this at home. And then we're going to take off the lower skid plates. We're going to take off both of them. They're just held on with 12mm bolts. To make quick work of that, I just used my Milwaukee 3/8 drive impact gun here. On the front shield, there's 4 12mm bolts and then 2 10mm bolts and 1 clip. Once you get all those removed, then you can go ahead and drop the shields down. Once you get the shields removed, the next step is going to unbolt the sway bar. So there's 4 14mm bolts holding the sway bar on. So we're just going to remove these two. We're not going to remove the link ends, just the bar where it mounts onto the frame. So go ahead and remove these 4 bolts, and then this sway bar will swing down. Having tools like this Milwaukee impact gun really makes jobs like this efficient and so much easier. It's not necessary to have tools like this, but they're nice to have. I will leave links for it in the description of the video. So once you get all 4 bolts removed, you can just lower the sway bar down like this and just let it hang by the linkage. Now there's a lot more access to get to the belt and the alternator and everything you need to do. So the next step is to remove the belt. So I got a 14mm ratcheting wrench on it. You can use a ratchet or a serpentine belt tool. Put it on the tensioner right up here, and you're going to rotate it counterclockwise, and that's going to spring the tension free. Then you can go ahead and slip the belt off. So you're going to want to disconnect the electrical connectors, the wires, and the wire loom from the alternator. The easiest way to do that is to take off the back shield. So go ahead and remove this back rear skid plate here. It's held on with 4 bolts. Now looking back towards the alternator from behind the differential here, you can see the back of the alternator, and you can get to the electrical connectors for the plugs, and you can just squeeze the little tab and pull the electrical connector off. Once you get the plug removed from the alternator, then I wanted to point out also how I'm reaching these is I'm looking through the differential. I'm reaching up in front of the differential here, and you can get plenty of access to get to that. Now we're going to unplug the main power feed going to the alternator. So there's a little plastic cover on it. You can just flip that cover off, and then there's a 10mm nut right here. We're going to remove that nut and pull the wire off. Now that you got that disconnected, on the front of the alternator is a wire loom holder here. So there's a little tab that you can flare. It looks like this right here, so you can do the front one here too. So you'll flare that little tab, and then you pull the wire loom off the little holder right there. So you'll flare it and pull. Here's a closer look at that little tab I'm referring to. So you just flare it out like this, and then you can slide it off. So once you get it disconnected, you can just pull the wiring harness down towards the front of the car and out of your way. Just let it hang down like this. Now we're going to start removing the 3 nuts and bolts that are holding the alternator on. Right now I'm removing the top bolt or nut. It's a 14mm, and then on the bottom it's a 14mm, and then right here in the middle is a 12mm. So we're going to remove all 3 of those. Also on the bottom of the alternator, to get to one of the bolts, there's an AC line here, and there's a little bracket that's holding the AC line on. We're going to remove this 10mm bolt here, and that'll give us enough play to maneuver the AC line out of the way to get the bolts off and get the alternator out of the car. So once you get that bolt removed, it allows you to slightly flex the AC line here out of the way of the bolts and get to them. So as you can see, when I'm removing the bottom bolt here, the line would be in the way, so now that allows us to move it out of the way to get it out. So now that you got the 2 nuts and the 1 bolt holding the alternator on loose, it's still not going to come out because it's making contact with the upper power steering pulley here. So we need to remove the 1 nut in the middle of the pulley there and pull the pulley off. And usually they would recommend a spanner wrench, but I don't have the tool, and most likely most people doing this will not have the tool. So what I did was took a 5-inch, 1/2-inch drive extension here and slid it through the pulley, and then rotated the pulley until it wedged against the alternator. And then I took my 17mm ratcheting wrench, put it on there, and loosened up the nut holding on the power steering pulley. So I'm using a ratcheting wrench. It's about 18 inches long. It's made by a company called Mountain, and they make jobs like this really easy. Here's kind of an angle that I wanted to show you how I'm getting at this. So I got the ratcheting wrench on there. You could probably get this with a standard ratchet and socket. So once you get the nut removed, then you can go ahead and remove your extension from out of the pulley there, and then wiggle the pulley, rocking it side to side motion, and then it will work its way off the spline. You don't have to remove this all the way out of the car. I just kind of, once I got it pulled out, I just kind of left it in there, just kind of wedged off to the side. Now you're able to slide the alternator off the little studs that it's mounted onto towards the front of the radiator. And once it clears the studs, then you can start lowering it down, and you just lightly flex the radiator hose and the AC line out of your way, and the cooler lines and everything. You just flex them out of the way, and you can work it out of the bottom of the car. I'm going to be installing a Denso remanufactured alternator. I will link this up in the description of the video also. So there's one little bracket on the alternator here that held the wire loom. We need to transfer that over to our new alternator. It's just held on with one little 10mm bolt. Go ahead and transfer that over to the new one. Now once you get this transferred over, now we're going to reinstall it back into the car. So you're going to flex the hoses out of your way and put it back up into the cavity where it came, where you took it out of, and then stab it onto the studs like this. Then you can go ahead and put the nuts and bolts back on it and tighten those all up. Once you get those all tightened up, then you can take the power steering pulley and slide it back over the splines. You'll probably have to wiggle it back and forth to get it to line up. And once it's on the splines, you can start the nuts. Before you do, I recommend that you put a little bit of red thread locker on the nut. That'll prevent it from vibrating loose and coming back off. Go ahead and spin that on there. Now you can wedge your extension back through the pulley when it jam it up against the side of the alternator, and then you can tighten up the 17mm nut holding the pulley on. Now you can go ahead and slip the belts back around all the pulleys, and using your 14mm wrench or ratchet, and ratchet the tensioner counterclockwise and slip the belt on. After that, you can put the 10mm bolt that held the AC line bracket back on and tighten that up. Once you get that tightened up, then you can take the wiring harness and feed it back up into position and remount the wire loom holders onto the little brackets here on the side of the alternator. And once you get that remounted, then you can put the main power feed on, start the 10mm nut and tighten that up and put the little plastic cap over it. And then you can plug the connector on the back of the alternator on. After that, you can lift the sway bar back up into position and start the 4 bolts. The bracket that went over the mounting bushing goes with the slot facing towards the radiator. So you'll lift it up into place, and then you can go ahead and tighten this down. Run them until they're snug, and about a quarter turn more if you're using it with a ratchet. Once you get all 4 of the bolts on the sway bar re-secured and tightened, then you can lift the shield back up, the 2 skid plates, and you go ahead and start them. I like to start the back one first, put that one up and start the 4 bolts. And once you get that mounted, then you can put the front shield back up and start all the bolts and the clips that held it on. After that, we're going to lower the vehicle back down, reconnect our negative battery cable. Once you got the battery cable connected, you can go ahead and start the vehicle up. I recommend putting a voltmeter on there and double checking that the alternator is charging. I will link up all the parts and tools that I use in this video in the description. That way, if you need to pick up any of those, you can find those links there. I'm Brian from How To Automotive. I'd like to thank you guys for watching my videos, encourage you to subscribe, invite you to head over to the howtoautomotive.com website for more valuable videos like this. Thank you again for watching.